Hello, I'm Dr. Teresa A. Smith. I'm looking forward to introducing to you Tina.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. Can
Hi,
you?
Tina. Hi, Tina. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Again, welcome to Talk with TAS. I'm Dr. Teresa A. Smith, and tonight I want to welcome Tina Shelton to the show. Tina is a registrar at the Chicago Theological Seminary and a pastor in the Northern Illinois Conference of the United Methodist Church. So,
hmm
Tina, welcome to
hmm
Talk with
Thank,
TAS.
thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, I am so glad to have you, and I'm so grateful to Deborah for introducing us. Now, Tina, I'm just going to jump right in, okay?
hmm
A quote that you shared with me. Life's journey may not always lead us where we expect, but it's the detours that often bring the greatest lessons. These words echo the message of your first novel. This ain't no promised land.
Uh-huh.
This ain't no promised land.
It.
And when I saw the title, I was intrigued
Mm-hmm.
because I often talk about getting to the promised land. You know,
hmm
Moses and the children of Israel, they were trying to get to the promised land, but
Right.
when they got there, some people thought this ain't no promised land.
This is not.
And we know the story.
Mhm.
You know, Moses went up to the mountain to have a conversation with God. And when he came back, you know, the people had converted back to what they were doing when they were in Egypt.
hmm
So, you know, your journey, Tina, to become an author and a pastor has likely had its share of unexpected turns. Was there ever a time where you felt like giving up on your dreams? And if so, how did you hold on to hope, rediscover it, and then, you know, when it seemed like it just couldn't be reached?
hmm Um, well, I think as I said in the article, the interview, that it took me 16 years to get my novel published. And I honestly, I gave up many times. But I felt like every time I put it down and I said, I'm not going to do this anymore, then my agent would say, "Oh, this publisher is interested. Can you rewrite it?" Or a family member would say, "What happened to that book?" And it just kept coming back up, and I realized this is something that God wanted. And I was finally like, "God, if you want this, then you're gonna have to make it happen." And it happened finally. So yeah.
Well, you know, in the Pathfields article that I did on you, that's on Dr. Todd Speaks,
hmm
in my column there, I thought it was interesting how, and as you said, it took you 16 years to write this book, but I think you said that you saw your mother,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, and that became, I guess, based upon what you just said, that was the answer that you needed from God to
hmm
know to keep going forward.
Right. Yeah, because and it only took me like 8, 9 months to write the book. It was the rewriting that I had to keep doing from different perspectives for different publishers. Everybody wanted something different, young adult or women's literature. So I just kept rewriting and kept growing. But my mother, she saw, like, because it was due to be published years ago, and it didn't go through. None of it went through. But she had a copy of that cover, and she was sitting on the bed in my old room because I was visiting her, and she was looking at that cover, and I saw her, looking at it, and she was looking at it in such a longing way, and then she put it away in the drawer, and I just thought, oh. you know, it really tugged on my heart because I realized that this was a dream for her as well. And I just felt like God was going, you got to go back to this. So, yeah, I did. And when I did this time, it went through. Yeah.
So now your dreams evolve. As you said, it was a dream for your mom too, and you could see that longing
Mm-hmm.
in her as she was looking at that cover.
Mm-hmm.
Now you talk about all the rewriting that you had to do from the varying
Mm-hmm.
perspectives, but every time you touched the book,
Mm-hmm.
had, were you aware that your dream was evolving also?
Um, I think I was aware that, throughout the years, I went through a divorce, I raised my children, and I was learning more and more. Like, I was gaining more and more wisdom and life lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So the book was evolving as I was evolving. And, I really think it was all in God's plan, because what I wrote so many years ago is a totally different book than what it is now. So,
And I think that is so important. And I'm trying to think, what is the phrase that they said? Deferred, delayed. What is it? Delayed. Well, anyway, I butcher phrases, but basically, you said something that I've come to terms with recently. I'm trying to complete this book, and you said 16 years.
mhm.
And I think we've probably been working on this book, and it's actually a book that my mother and I are sort of writing together. And
Wow.
it has been, I went back and looked in the emails. I think we started in 2010.
Mm.
So so this is interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
we have yet to finish it. And I was going to put it out this year, but what I realized when I didn't, and just recently, that I'm still evolving.
Right.
I'm still experiencing life. So
Mm-hmm.
those things have to be reflected in the book. And that's what you basically said, that the book, as it started out 16 years ago, you were a totally different person.
Right.
And the message that you had to bring forth, or you had to birth for God, is
Mm-hmm.
totally different.
Right.
And so therefore you had to have those life
Mm-hmm.
experiences in order to bring it forth. And I think also it speaks to your perseverance, because you still kept working at it and you never gave up on your dream.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, on page 27 of the Kindle edition of the book, you write, I sat on the stairs next to her, hugging my knees, but having nothing to say.
Mm-hmm.
I knew God was with us, but I didn't know how to explain that to Francine. God was God was holding us. That was all I knew. Even in our aloneness, we were still being held. We were warm. We could think. We still had each other.
Mm-hmm.
How does this theme of God's constant presence play in your understanding of holding on to your dreams, even in the face of loss or feeling like giving up?
Um, Repeat that last part of the
Mhm.
question again.
Mhm. I'm going to repeat the whole question.
Mm-hmm.
How does the theme of God's constant presence play into your understanding of holding on to your dreams, or, even in the face of loss, or when you feel like giving up? Because when I read that section of your book, basically what it said to me was, you couldn't explain it to you, the character,
Yeah.
couldn't explain it to Francine, but
Mm-hmm.
God was still there, even though it seemed like He had left them and their backs were against the wall. He was still there.
Yeah.
And so, my question for you is, given that the length of time that it took, and the fact that you've gone through a divorce, you've got adult children, how did God's presence help to almost settle some of maybe the anxiety or the angst of trying to hold on to your dream amongst all the changes of just living life?
So, yeah, that's a good question. God's presence was a constant, and I think that God has ways of letting you know that God is there. It could be a small thing. It could be a song that comes to your spirit and just bubbles up. So when I was going through all of that, I would be like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Da, da, da. And I would hear that song of, I've heard it so many times. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust him. take him at his word, and it would just bubble up. It wasn't in my head, it was in my heart.
Yes.
It was like in my belly. And so things like that would come up, or I'd hear a scripture, or somebody out of the blue would say something, and it was like they were reading my mail. Right? They
Mhm.
didn't know what I was going through. They didn't know. And I'd be like, oh my goodness. God has a way of just like tapping you and letting you know that, he's still there. He sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. He knows exactly what you're going through. And so I love that. I love that about God.
Well, I thank you for saying that because I know what you're saying. It'll be like out of nowhere. And it's like, it's nothing but God
Mm-hmm.
because He just reassures us all the time. And we just have to be mindful of what's happening.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Thank you, Angela, for joining us. And thank you, Deborah, for giving me what I was trying to say. Dreams deferred. They just deferred. It doesn't mean that they go away. They
Mm-hmm.
just on hold for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tina, faith can be difficult to hold on through hardship. It's hard to hold on to it sometimes. Were there
Mm-hmm.
times in your journey when you found it challenging to keep your faith?
Mm. Yeah. Another recurring theme is God sees me. And
Mhm.
I go through seasons where I think God does not see me. God does not know what's happening.
Mhm.
And I often think of, it was Hannah who says, the God who sees. And uh, this is when you're nervous, right? You can't think
Mhm.
of these. You
Yes.
can't think of the scriptures.
Mhm.
But Hannah and Sarah, were together, and Hannah was the one that got the boot. But God answered her prayers. God saw her son,
Mhm.
and then she says, you are the God who sees. So I try to hang on to things, places where God has shown up, and not let my current circumstance make me believe that the God who has shown up in the past is not in the present.
And that's so important. I think that, well, in my mind, that's the reason why things happen the way they do, to
Mhm.
almost test us to see if we're going to go back and realize that He showed up for us before. So therefore, He's going to show up again. And so therefore, we have to, keep the faith.
Right, right. Yeah.
Now, you said that life's detours can lead to the greatest lessons. Could you share a detour in your life and how um, in your own life and how that unexpected detour kind of brought wisdom out from it?
Um, well, I could tell you where an unexpected detour brought a
Mhm.
blessing, and that is when I was in college. I went to college for journalism. However, I couldn't. In order to get to start the journalism part of the degree, you had to pass a test. Well, I could not get past that test. I do not know why. I think I was nervous or whatever. But I was writing for the paper, and I would write articles about um, authors who were coming to speak, and I would do features on them. And the dean of the English department began to notice me, and then I said, "You know what? Maybe I should just do a degree in English and, major in creative writing." Well, when I walked into the English department, I got in. Then when I walked into the English department, I felt like this warmth, and I just felt like I was at home. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is where I
Praise.
belong the whole time. And I even tried to do a little bit of journalism, but I just didn't like it. I didn't, I had no passion for it. And here I am today. I'm still writing. So that was, for me, that was a very important detour in my life.
and I'm with you. Something positive came out of
Mhm.
it, and I was thinking as you were speaking, you went from writing features to now having your own book,
Right.
uh, and being featured. Now
Mhm.
look at God. We
Exactly.
just have to wait until His timing.
Yeah.
Uh, that is so wonderful. Um, Now, you work closely with communities who are experiencing generational trauma. In This Ain't No Promised Land,
Mhm.
the characters, face their own, I'm going to call it like their buried wounds.
Mhm.
How was writing about trauma impacted your own views on healing and growth, you know, personally and or in your ministry?
Mhm. Um, I think, trauma is so deeply embedded, and so much can be done if we just talk and communicate and are open to understanding what the other person is going through. And I see that so often with the families that I have, journeyed with for years, that communication is so important. And a lot of trauma comes from a lack of, or a lot of sustained trauma comes from a lack of communication.
And why do you think communication is so difficult for people?
Because we don't want to face the hard things. We don't want to be challenged. We don't want to be
Mhm.
upset. Courageous conversation is
Mhm.
so important. And we have to risk being upset with one another. We have to risk, offending one another and stepping on one another's toes if we want to get to, where we need
Mhm.
to. Yeah.
Well, it's like we're trying to get to the promised land, but we don't want to cross the Red Sea.
Right.
And it's like I think about it as you talk about, that generational trauma.
Hmm.
And for those of us who are people of faith, it's so
Hmm.
sad to me that we are not brave enough to do the work that's needed when we understand that He's already died for our sins.
Right.
So why would we not want to live the best life possible here?
Hmm.
Because in my mind, when we don't take care of the things that we should have taken care of, that He's given us many opportunities to do, we're going
Hmm.
to have to pay for that on the other side, because that means we're still injuring His little one.
Hmm.
And we forget the scripture where He talks about what you've done to the least of mine, you've done to me. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't, give me something to drink. And people are like, but when did I do it? When you did it to the least one. Whether
Right.
that's somebody that's your family member, someone in your
Hmm.
community, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
One home can save several. Oh, absolutely.
And yeah.
You're right, Deborah. One home can save several traumas, but you
Yeah.
got to be brave enough to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
And she says one home can have several
Oh,
traumas.
excuse me. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you, you guys. I got these glasses on. I need to take them off. Yes, one home can have several
Hmm.
traumas. Oh, but let's stay with that for just a moment,
Hmm. Hmm.
because in your role, well, in both of your roles, as a registrar and then as a minister,
Hmm.
I'm sure that you see trauma playing out in both capacities, but it's presented perhaps
Hmm.
differently. But you're seeing that. So, if you could give, say, a parent who is aware that there's trauma in their home, multiple traumas,
Hmm.
but don't know how to start to address it, what advice would you give them?
Therapy. Go to therapy. Go to family therapy. Go to individual therapy. It makes a difference. And therapy is having a safe space
Mhm.
to talk about the things that are hurting you. I mean, that's what therapy is: having a safe space, and being able to hear each other, and having someone there who can translate. Because sometimes family, we can't hear each other because we're so used to each other.
Mhm.
Um, I just can't stress enough. And we as Black folks, a lot of times we don't want to go to therapy, but it makes all the difference. I feel like it's something that we should normalize, not ostracize. So yeah, I think therapy is important. Incorporating God, believing that God can change, because if you go and you say nothing's going to change, then what's the point of going, right?
Yep.
So believe that God can change the situation. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Gracie wrote her traumas. She wrote them out in her journal. And you know, her mother read her journal. You know,
Mhm.
we find and that her mother read her journal so she could actually see, because she didn't her Charlotte didn't understand what her girls, how they were hurting, until she read that journal.
Mhm.
And it gave her insight into how deeply she hurt her kids. So yes, journaling is another way to deal with trauma. Yeah.
You know, as a mother, and as a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and as an African American,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not gonna subscribe to that superwoman
No.
complex,
No. Mm-mm.
because I think that kind of keeps us stifled in the same space.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about the old adage, what's done in this house stays in this house. So when Deborah's talking about one home can have several traumas,
Mm-hmm.
that's usually the way it is, because everything is contained there and
Right.
no one is seeking assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess what I want to leave our audience with is that this ain't no promised land. When you pick it up and read it, you may see parts of your own family there, parts of individuals that you know, parts of you there. But take it as an opportunity to begin a dialogue. Because I know, based upon our conversations, communication is very important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we talk about Gracie, when she wrote about her trauma, Charlotte, read it, she could then sort of visualize, begin to understand just how things unfolded, impacted her daughters.
Mm-hmm.
That opens the door to communication. And
Right.
as you stated, communication is hand in hand with God,
Yeah.
are the keys for making a lasting change.
Right. Yeah.
So, Tina, if there's one last word that you want to leave with the audience, in addition to telling them how they can follow you and keep up with what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you that opportunity now to share that with the audience.
Yeah. Um, I think, don't give up on God. Don't give up on your dreams. Keep pushing, keep trying, and even if you're like, Abraham, or you're like, you know what, it's not going to happen. Um, be open to what God is doing in that season, and how God may be moving and speaking to you. Be open, and that's the thing. Whether we're communicating or with family, whether we're working on our dreams, we can't close our hearts. Keep your heart open, and if you keep your heart open, anything could happen. It really can. It really can. It's our no's that stop us from moving forward. Um, so you can find me at author Tina Shelton on Instagram and on Facebook. And I often go by TS Walking as well. And that's TS Walking as in Tina Shelton walking. I walk through anything. I always remind myself to keep walking no matter what happens. So, yeah.
Well, Tina, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. It went too quickly. And I love the lasting message that you left for the audience. Don't give up on God. Be open to what God is doing in your life. Don't you instill those no's and prevent your blessing from coming. And I think that your life is a testimony that you didn't give up on God, and you kept the
Right.
communication with God open, and
Mm-hmm.
you went from featuring others to now
Yeah.
you are an author and you are being featured. And I just think that that's just an example of being open and keeping the communication flowing. So again, I want to thank you for being my guest on Talk with TAS.
Thank
I
you.
hope it's, you're very welcome, and I hope that we'll be continuing to chat. And guys, if you have not read her article on Pathos, please go and read her article on Pathos. You'll get a little more information about Tina. She's a very interesting person. And so you can find that on Pathos, Patheos, and it's Dr. Taz Speaks column. And thank you everyone for joining us, Deborah, Angela, Estella. If I missed anyone, thank you for joining us also. And so until next time, remember, before you take care of anyone else, make sure you take care of yourself first. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.